Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 absolutely, completely, totally essential violin sonatas for beginners. Now, you may well ask, what is a violin sonata? Well, it's a large work, usually multi-sectional, multi-movement work for piano and violin. Well, why don't we mention the violin? Well, because a piano sonata is just for solo piano, but a violin sonata is not for solo violin. The way that the universe has evolved in the world of classical music, if you talk about a sonata for an instrument that is not the keyboard, then you assume that the keyboard is there anyway. So violin sonata is violin and piano. Cello sonata is cello and piano. Bassoon sonata is bassoon and piano. Horn sonata is a horn and a piano. You always take the piano for granted. The reason is because the solo instrument, the feature instrument, is the one that is supposed to be getting the lion's share of the billing. It's the one that gets the tunes, the one that's supposed to stand out, where the piano accompanies. But the truth of the matter is that in the great sonatas by the great composers, these two instruments work out some sort of, whatever the two instruments are, the piano and the other thing, work out some kind of détente in which they share the limelight. But it is up to the pianist to know when to back off and when to take center stage, because the piano, which can make lots of notes at once and is much louder and noisier and whatever, can overwhelm the soloist if they are nasty and egotistical and stupid and unmusical, as they sometimes are. So the sonata in question tells us that the pianist had better behave and better be a really, really good partner to whatever instrument is supposedly the featured instrument. Now, violin sonatas, for all intents and purposes, originated with Beethoven. Now, people will get hysterical. They'll say, well, Bach wrote violin sonatas, and he did, and Mozart wrote a whole ton of them, and he did, and even Haydn wrote maybe one or two, I don't know. Some of these composers earlier did write violin sonatas, but they were on a rather different basis. I'm talking about the kind of sonata in which the two instruments have that kind of co-equal existence, and are major works, really, really major works. And Beethoven was the guy. I mean, he really was the guy who got the thing going. And so we need to begin this list with Beethoven. And I don't want to hear any guff about anybody who came before, because that's a topic for another day. These are essential ones for beginners. Remember that. And also remember, my dear friends who know this repertoire, we are only interested in the works on the list. We are not discussing works that are not on the list. And I need to say this again, because it doesn't seem to make any difference. You guys come up with other stuff. Oh, you left off this, you forgot that. And I wind up deleting all of your comments, which I will continue to do. So please stick with the works on the list, and let's keep it down to a manageable 10, after which people can go and discover what they want to discover. It's no problem. Beethoven, like I said, we start with Beethoven. His Kreutzer Sonata, that is the most famous one. Now, it's called the Kreutzer Sonata because it was, associated with a violinist. His name was Rudolf Kreutzer. I don't know whether that means anything at all to most of you, and it never meant anything to me. It became a wonderful short story by Leo Tolstoy, and also a short story that was turned into a string quartet by Leos Janáček, the Kreutzer Sonata. So, it has a lot of sort of cultural legacy to it. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. It's a big, rich, ballsy, exciting piece that gives quite a bit for the violin to do by itself, and quite a lot for the piano to do by itself. And then the two of them somehow manage to get along. It's the work where you can almost hear the violin sonata concept being worked out in the classical aesthetic that I'm talking about, where the two players have an equal importance and an equal contribution to the proceedings. So Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata, which is technically his violin sonata number 9, there are 12 of them, at least, I think 12. I never remember how many of things there are, but there's a bunch, and it's just a terrifically exciting work. Absolutely fabulous. It's not a late work by Beethoven. It's his Opus 47. It's middle-ish period, early maturity, let's call it, and you're going to love it. It's just fantastic. Next, Alkan, that great, crazy French piano virtuoso who wrote 3 magnificent chamber works. He wrote a piano trio, he wrote a cello sonata, and he wrote something called Grand Duo Concertant, which is a grand duo. Concertant means one of the people in it is a soloist, as if in a concerto sort of thing, a flashy, show-offy thing. And this is that. This violin sonata is amazing. The middle movement is called Hell. Yes, I kid you not. It's called Enfer in French. Hell. And it has the piano playing dark, creepy, clunky chords, while the violin tries to sing a seraphic, ethereal, heavenly sort of hymn tune above. And it is a perfect piece to really show you what can happen with 2 extraordinary virtuosos who are bent on some kind of musical discourse or dialogue. And after Hell, where they have to try and somehow find a way to get along, the finale is just extraordinary. Extraordinarily. It has amazing unison playing by both the piano and the violin. They're like locked in this sort of virtuoso roller coaster ride until the end. It's just a great piece. A great piece. You'll really love it. I mean, people don't know it as well as they should, but it's a landmark violin sonata, especially for the period it was written, which was like the 1840s and 50s, somewhere in there, when there wasn't a lot of chamber music being written outside Germany. Beethoven, got the whole thing going with his grand selection of chamber works, and Mozart too, and Haydn with his quartets. That was part of the German school. But outside of the Germanic world, chamber music had not become quite a thing yet. And so the Alkan Sonata was really quite something. And speaking of which, we are going to talk about now what happened outside of Germany. Because lots of German composers were writing like chamber music, and people we don't care about, and music we don't care about. But the French, they got going with it, and oh, so beautifully. First, Gabriel Fauré, who was a major chamber music composer. He also wrote songs, and he wrote a few orchestral works, and he's most famous for his Requiem, his beautiful lyrical Requiem Mass, which is like 40 minutes of incredibly sweet French mellifluousness. But he also wrote stunning chamber music, and one of his first works was his first violin sonata, a major, major work in the tradition of Beethoven, quite clearly, because the German folk were the models for what the French folk were starting to do. And after Fauré, or at the same time as Fauré, basically, I'm not quite sure about exactly which one came first, and it doesn't matter, Saint-Saens, the famous Carnival of the Animals guy, and Danse Macabre, an organ symphony, was also a fantastic chamber music composer. He wrote a huge body of chamber music that's excellent, and his violin sonatas are also extraordinary. His first violin sonata was one of the great early works of French chamber music in that style, in that Beethovenian style. So Fauré and Saint-Saens, they both got going around the same time. I actually think Saint-Saens came first, if I'm not mistaken. But they were really important works, and they're beautiful, beautiful, passionate, intense works full of really good tunes, and just you're going to love them. And they're not too long. They're not hard to deal with. They're really, really attractive. So after that, we go to Brahms. Because after Beethoven, the next big chamber music guy actually was Mendelssohn, but Mendelssohn wasn't a violin sonata person. So after Mendelssohn, we have Brahms, essentially, in the German universe. And Brahms wrote 3 violin sonatas. Count them, 1, 2, 3. They're really, really lovely works, and they all fit like on one CD. They're not overly long. Again, these pieces, quite often, chamber works, sometimes they're as big as symphonies. They often can be. They can be huge. I mean, there are violin sonatas that are 50 minutes long. They could be enormous in 4 big chunky movements. But quite often they're only in 3 movements, or they're shorter movements. It's rather nice, actually. One of the best ways to enjoy music in what we call large forms, multi-movement, multi-sectional pieces, is to listen to some of these more compact chamber works. because they don't tax your patience. And it's foolish to insist that people are just going to sit down and listen to half an hour of something and not think anything about it. The difficulty in classical music, as I've always said from the very beginning, is time. It's a question of being able to focus your attention for the sufficient amount of time to listen to the whole work and to listen to the work in its entirety over its various sections. And so these pieces are really, really good works to get you started. If you don't really know about the modality of works in large forms, in multi-movement forms, they won't make you crazy. You can listen to them as entirely or in bits and take a break. It's just great. And the Brahms Violin Sonatas are like that. Brahms was a fabulous chamber music composer, and he wrote some enormous pieces of chamber music. Great chamber, like the second piano quartet. It's like 50 minutes long. I mean, he wrote big works. But he also wrote some very wonderfully concise and lyrical pieces, and his violin sonatas fall into that category. So I chose his G major Violin Sonata No. 1. It's just lovely. Absolutely lovely. Like all these pieces, they're just full of good tunes and good, just... What can I tell you? I mean, it's great music. I can say it's wonderful and terrific. I run out of adjectives. It's just beautiful. And you will enjoy the Brahms First Sonata. And if you like it, the other two are just as good. You're in great shape. And after Brahms, Edvard Grieg, the Peer Gynt guy, in the Hall of the Mountain King. And the morning thing from Peer Gynt. It was every salad dressing commercial in the world. Well, Grieg was not known for writing music in large forms. That wasn't his thing. He tended to write miniatures, small piano works, the incidental music like Peer Gynt, where you have, scene music for a play. But he was a very fine composer of chamber music. He was able to write very confidently in large forms for smaller forces. And his violin sonatas, there are 3, no coincidence, are really, really lovely. They're full of that Norwegian folk melos that Grieg just absorbed into his being. He didn't have to do it consciously. His tunes just came out that way. We listen to them and we say, oh, that sounds Norwegian or Scandinavian or something. There's a definite personal character to the cut and thrust of his melodies, and they're really, really lovely works. So I chose his 3rd violin sonata in C minor. It's a major work, one of the great violin sonatas of the 19th century. And if you like other things by Grieg, and everybody does, I mean, you can't not love Grieg. That'd be like, saying you don't love, life, You're really going to enjoy his violin sonatas. They don't get the attention that his other music gets because people just aren't aware of them. They're not aware of just how fabulous he was at writing this music. So give his violin sonatas a shot. You will be happy. Next comes the great violin sonata, the iconic violin sonata of the second half of the 19th century. And that is the single violin sonata by César Franck. Oh, this is so famous. It is so popular. It is so beautiful. It has a big, passionate opening movement and a really gorgeous slow movement and a finale. Oh, a finale. It is the most beautiful tune in the world. And it's a canon. You know what a canon is? That's when one voice follows another, like in Row Your Boat. One starts, then someone else starts with the same thing. The main theme is a canon, with the violin and the piano following one another. And it is the most wonderful tune. Ya-da-da-da-da-dum, ya-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ya-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ya-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Oh, God, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. You're going to die when you hear it. What a great piece. This piece is so beautiful and so famous. It's been arranged for cello. It's been arranged for flute. It's been arranged for saxophone. I mean, every solo instrument in the world that could get its lips or bow or whatever it needs to around it plays this piece. It is that great. And so it's one of the essential pieces of music. Forget whether it's a violin sonata. I mean, it's an incredible thing. Next, the Danish composer Carl Nielsen also wrote 2 very, very fine violin sonatas that nobody knows. I mean, they really don't. I don't know why they don't know them. They are totally fantastic works. His second violin sonata, that's the one I picked, but there are two of them. So if you get a recording, you'll probably get both. And if you can download or stream, you can listen to just one. What a beautiful work this is. He's another composer like Grieg and like Franck and like really most of the great composers who had a very, very personal melodic style. So when you listen to the music, even if there's something about it that doesn't hit you at once, you listen to it and you realize that you're in the presence of a genuine personality, somebody who really has something to say and who really knows how to do it well. And Nielsen was a violinist. He really wrote well for the violin. This is one of the great, great violin sonatas from the beginning of the 20th century, and it deserves all the attention you can give it. I mean, some things just baffle me in our music. You know, I do these essential lists, they're for beginners, and people say, well, you have to talk about the most popular things. And yes, you do. But when you're dealing with chamber music, first of all, by nature, chamber music is not popular. Chamber music is usually considered to be for the cognoscenti. There's no reason for that. It should be popular because it's just as beautiful, and the composers who write it are just as great when they write chamber music as when they write big grandiose symphonies. I mean, there's no difference. It's just a question of scale. It's not even a question of form. Scale in terms of performing forces. Many of these works are just as big as symphonies. Sometimes, as I said, they could be more concise, but it's expressively speaking, you get the same bang for your buck. Let's put it that way. Big or little, large or small, it's all in there. And so it baffles me that some of these pieces are not as more popular or not as well known as they should be. But the Nielsen Violin Sonata No. 2 is a great, great, great work. And I know that because you are unbiased and unprejudiced, and because you're just out for a fabulous musical discovery, you're going to agree when you hear it. So after Nielsen, the Romanian composer George Enescu. Now, he wrote 3 violin sonatas, and number 3 seems to be a popular number with violin sonatas, is one of the all-time great nationalist, romantic, folkloristic works. It's Violin Sonata No. 3, subtitled Dans le caractère populaire roumain. That is, in the popular Romanian style. And it is one of the most extraordinary creations for violin and piano. The entire, it's the 20th century by now, or the 1920s, or thereabouts. This is a piece that attempts to notate that which cannot be notated. That is the authentic style of Romanian folk violin playing. And if you have a chance, I know that this is really off topic and not like, in the beginner category, but I just want to tell you, to look at this music is one of the most fascinating things in the world, because Enescu has tried to notate every detail, nuance of timbre and rhythm and expression that he possibly could in creating a piece that is entirely imbued with the essence of Romanian folk music. It is an extraordinarily beautiful piece, an unbelievably passionate piece. And one of the things about it that I think makes it so remarkable is that in creating this, I mean, it's obviously it's a stylized work, right? It's a piece of art music. He's managed to really encapsulate this wonderful earthy style. It's just an incredible achievement, really incredible achievement, and harder than hell to play. Let me tell you, boy, is that a piece of work. Because you have to, virtually every note has some kind of indication of something you need to do with it, and it all has to sound completely natural and effortless and spontaneous. And when you do it right, it does. What a great piece of music. Something we should all get to know, and you'll love it when you do. It's phenomenal. Finally, last but not least, another French violin sonata by Maurice Ravel. Now, Ravel is another composer. He's not known as a chamber music composer. Of course, he wrote a string quartet, which is very beautiful, and a piano trio, which is very beautiful, and a very interesting duo sonata. That is, it's 2 players. That's not a piano, for like violin and cello. Other than that, there is his violin sonata, which is a wonderful work that has a super cool, nifty, slow movement called Blues. And it's just terrific music. Again, it's a work that, because it's a singleton work, he didn't write more. And, French composers are not known for their being chamber music composers, unless you're Saint-Saens or Fauré, basically. But it's one of the great violin sonatas, again, from the first bit of the 20th century, and something you should really get to know. It's enormous fun, and it's modern, and it's zippy, and it's got great tunes, and it's Ravel. I mean, he wrote Bolero. It's the same guy. And that's my point with this chamber music. It's the same folks, just doing their thing in another way. And one of the great joys of getting to know this music and getting to know classical music and getting to know these composers is you get to explore and enjoy all the ways that they did their thing. So have a great time with these violin sonatas, folks. I know you're going to love them. Keep on listening. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.